this tutorial, I'd like to explore some of the user settings available to your LightStanza models. You can access the user settings by going to your user icon in the upper right. Select Settings. It's important to note that these are global settings that will apply to future projects or existing projects if you make future changes, but they will not apply retroactively to projects you've already completed or to other users on your team. Think of these as your own personal default settings to set as you wish for future projects. So on the General tab, we have some basic settings that are fairly self-explanatory. One other thing to point out with the settings dialog, if you hover over a setting, you'll get a detailed flyout explaining what the setting does with more information. On the General tab, we have some basic options for length and area units. You can do US to keep things in feet, or use SI for meters and square meters. Similarly, for illuminance units, we have foot candles, which is the default in the US, or lux, which is more common in metric. This is lumens per square foot versus lumens per square meter. Viewer control mode, this will affect your default navigation options. Typically select is most flexible, but orbit, pan, and zoom do have their uses on certain projects. Below that, there's the option to send automatic simulation emails. This will notify you via email each time a calculation is complete. You can turn this on or off depending on whether or not you want to be notified. And the last option, Confidential LightStanza Support Access, enables you to allow the LightStanza support team to view your projects for assistance, or you can turn it off for confidential projects. Next, on the Models tab, we start getting into some more complex settings that will vary depending on the specific type of modeling software you're using. First, you can set a default model location, which is primarily important for daylight calculations, so you get the proper latitude and longitude. It can also be helpful for annotative purposes, just so your documents are properly labeled. With import CAD file as basic images, if you enable this, CAD files will import more quickly, but you'll lose key snapping functionality, which can be assistive in modeling. The setting to automatically default visual transmission values for windows is a key input for daylighting analysis. With this option enabled, all windows will be assigned a visual transmittance of 65% and a neutral color, which is pretty typical for vision windows and daylight glass. However, the materials will be maintained behind the scenes from the original modeling software, and each window of that material will be separated into a distinct group so that you can then apply updates as necessary, or disable the setting to simply use the material properties from the original modeling software such as Revit. When working with windows from an imported Revit model, Revit will represent the window geometry as a three-dimensional cube with a thickness. While this creates a more realistic visualization in the original model, it presents a problem for accurate ray tracing. So by default, LightStanza will flatten all windows from Revit to a single plane. Occasionally you will want to disable this option for troubleshooting, particularly if something like a curved window isn't coming in correctly. You may be able to correct this by disabling the single plane setting, but typically it is recommended to leave this enabled at all times. Now, thinking beyond windows, when working with surfaces from an imported Revit model, Revit may or may not have accurate materials applied with a realistic reflectance value. With this option enabled, LightStanza will override the major surfaces, floors, ceilings, and walls with the IES default reflectances of 20, 80, and 50%. You'll be able to modify these after import, or you can uncheck this option to just use the material properties directly from Revit. When modeling new rooms in LightStanza, there's the ability to generate calculation grids automatically. This will be done based on the boundary of the room and be placed at a default grid height of either the US standard of 30 inches or a custom option that you choose using the options below. The Generate Grid Automatically settings do not apply to Revit imports. Instead, those are set by the existing room and space boundaries in the Revit model, and calculation grids can be added automatically or not based on the export settings in the Revit plugin. Next, on the Results and Reporting tab, there are some additional settings to control the calculation output and visualization. Decimal precision can be particularly helpful if you primarily work with site lighting or other low foot candle type of applications. It can be helpful to increase the decimal precision here, or set it to auto mode to let the program decide how many decimals to display for you. Below that, there are some different settings to control the default point-in-time illuminance grid visualization. This will set what appears in model mode and reports based on your specific company standards. Numbers only typically works best for printing, where the smooth or square options tend to look better on a computer screen. And finally, we have some defaults to determine what types of files get included in report downloads. There are various different options depending on what you normally need to look at for your final output. And finally, on the Electric Lighting tab, there are some options for how luminaires behave in LightStanza. You can assign a default luminaire marker color, default line weight, a position for the luminaire label. This can be particularly useful for final deliverables, and also the opportunity to define a global default light loss factor across the application. 0.9 is usually a safe guess when no more information is available, and then you can always override this using the lighting panel after you've moved beyond the defaults. And then once you've applied these settings, there's no need to do anything more other than click Return to LightStanza. And if any project you have open, you'll want to click the refresh button to apply the changes. And that's it. With that, you can make adjustments to most common settings in LightStanza. Thank you.